Three areas where I think, at least my views, coincide with all of you. One, I think it's important that we find ways to better treat the Iranian opposition, both in Iran and outside of Iran. I mean U.S. policy, I mean citizens. I think it's important that we embrace those movements of freedom. Secondly, with the MEK, I think it makes sense to take them off the terrorism list. You know, bureaucracies move slow. To move them, you've got to do sometimes gigantic leaps. I'm not making any excuses, but I do think this is something that we need to reassess right away. And it seems that this is a nascent, an important movement, and we should take steps to make that happen. The third is the Camp Ashraf situation. Obviously, we've got to find ways to protect those Iranians that are there. I think it's inexcusable that we're not doing it. Talk about having leverage with the government of Iraq. We do have it. And so we should find ways to make that happen.
Now, with regard to Iran, there are three very dangerous consequences with regard to the path that it is on. The first one, of course, is that it becomes nuclear weapons capable. That has a geometry all unto its own. The second reason, the second danger that eventuality would pose, if in fact it does happen, is the fact that it would trigger a nuclear arms race in the Persian Gulf. And the third one, and the one, frankly, that as National Security Advisor worries me even more than the first two, is that Iran, as a state sponsor of terrorism, could easily be seen to be the type of country that would export that kind of technology, weapons of mass destruction, to terrorist organizations. And I think that this conference serves to underscore not only just the emotion and the passion, but the logic that we have to take this on and we have to be successful. And I thank you very, very much for inviting me to be here. Thank you.
Decent Iranian government of all stripes. And certainly it has now come time for us to take a very fresh look at the way we are dealing with Iran. One thing we should no longer do, and in this I join the others on this panel, is keep the MEK listed as a terrorist organization. In 22 years of practicing law, I read a lot of legal decisions, and I recently read the Circuit Court's decision in the case involving the MEK versus the State Department. And my experience, and I think that of most lawyers who are interested in international matters, is that courts ordinarily give a great deal of deference to the executive branch with respect to the conduct of foreign policy. This eloquently and well-written decision of last July by the D.C. Circuit effectively says quite bluntly, although it doesn't use this particular analogy, that what the Department of State has done is what the Red Queen does in Alice in Wonderland when she is asked if first we're going to have the trial and the verdict and then the execution. She says, oh, no, execution first, then trial. So we need to incorporate that move together with a vigorous effort to work with those who want a decent Iran outside the country and inside the country.
The things I want to speak about are of great importance to the United States, of great importance to the people of Iran, and on a personal basis occupied a lot of my time when I was fortunate to serve as the director of the FBI. And what I wanted to do is give you a case study, which is a case which is now almost 10 years old, the Khobar Towers bombing, but which has great relevance to many of the subjects that we've discussed here today. And the reason was simple. They did not want to confront the fact and the reality that the Iranian government had murdered 19 Americans and blown up Khobar towers. And as investigators, we accepted that. That's a foreign policy matter which goes way beyond our jurisdiction and our pay grade. So we would go back repeatedly and say, do you want us to stop conducting the investigation? And the answer would always be, no, we want you to conduct a vigorous investigation, find all the evidence, and charge whoever can be charged. And this is the confusion and an example of the confusion of that policy, which in many respects continues today through a new administration with regard to the MEK listing, with regard to Camp Ashraf, and with regard to this lack of clarity and lack of purpose in terms of achieving what are very basic objectives here. The amazing heroics that everybody witnessed after the 2009 elections on the streets of Tehran. It was almost a critical mass. It was almost exactly where it should have ended. It didn't dissipate. Those young men and women, those heroes, that's not been erased. That's not been compromised. It's there. It's powerful. All of the sanctions, all of the work that is done covertly and overtly through diplomatic channels, through military channels, through intelligence, law enforcement channels. And the objective here is to support the strongest combination and the strongest thrust point for what we want to achieve. And that is going to be on the streets and homes and colleges in that huge and great country. And it's going to probably happen, I would predict, within the near term. I don't think you can keep that kind of force under wraps and restrained with the longevity and the sustainability that the regime would certainly like. Thank you.
I've just returned this past weekend from a tour across the Middle East. During the trip, I met with a number of senior political leaders and military officials. At every meeting, at the top of the agenda was Iran, the threat it poses to stability in the region, its support for terrorism, and what might be done to halt its nuclear weapons program. Finally, is there anything that the United States can do to assist the opposition? Let me offer a few ideas. The Obama administration should continue to tighten the economic noose around this regime and lobby other governments to do the same. Last week, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced that the sanctions were having an impact on Iran's economic behavior. The administration needs to continue and intensify these efforts. Second, the United States needs to target its criticism at Iranian leaders and policies, and not at the Iranian nation. Efforts to expose corruption at the highest levels would be an example of what I have in mind. But more broadly, the Obama administration needs to talk up and take up the banner of human rights and democracy, and at the very least give greater rhetorical support to the opposition movement. A good first step would be delisting the MEK.
I hesitate to add the numbers, but I would suspect that there is assembled on this stage more than 200 years of experience in law enforcement, anti-terrorist activities, military service, and American foreign policy. A distinguished set of careers. We can differ on how we believe American policy should respond to the growing threat of Iran possessing nuclear weapons. But it appears to me, as I listened to every speaker, one thought was common. The discussions in Turkey must be more than another meaningless milestone en route to nuclear weapons held by the government in Tehran. Second, the listing of the MEK as a terrorist organization by the United States government is wrong. It is wrong. It is wrong as a matter of law. It is contrary to the facts. It is interfering with the rights of American citizens to be heard. And it is contrary to American foreign policy. in having expatriate groups of Iranians from around the world organize, as is their right and their responsibility, to bring to the country of their ancestors' birth a responsible government. I leave you finally with this prediction. As it has been difficult to be part of the resistance to the Iranian government, made dangerous by the actions in Tehran and complicated by policies of the United States government, one day you will look upon your children and your grandchildren with pride and say, when all the world had looked the other way, when even the United States government made it difficult to stand up against tyranny in Tehran, your family was there and stood firm. You'll be proud you were here today and proud you were